The distress signal went out wrong. That was the only way to describe it. Advisor Soon had been awake for 31 hours, running on stimulant tablets and cold nutrient paste, when he reached across the broadcast console and entered the frequency range. His hands were shaking. 3 outer colony worlds had gone dark in 6 days, and the council chamber smelled like fear even through the ventilation filters. He needed to call the scout ships near the border. Just the scouts. A quiet call for a quiet problem before it became a loud one. He hit transmit. The signal went to every military receiver within 4 light years on a full-spectrum emergency band. He did not realize the mistake for 11 minutes. By then, it was already traveling at the speed of light in every direction, and there was nothing in the universe that could take it back. High Arbiter Yelm was not a being who panicked. He had governed the Velori Compact through 2 economic collapses, 1 border war, and the slow disaster of the Marin Plague. He had learned long ago that panic was simply the mind's first draft, and that first drafts were always terrible. So when Soon came to him with white skin and wide eyes and explained what he had done, Yelm sat very still and said nothing for a while. "Tell me exactly what frequency was used," he said. Soon told him. Yelm closed his eyes. That band was old. It dated back to the early days of the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact, back when the founders believed all species would share common receivers. Most advanced civilizations had long since moved to tighter, more sophisticated bands. Most. Not all. Which species still monitors that band? Yelm asked, though something in the back of his mind had already started to answer the question. Soon pulled up the registry. His hand was shaking again. He read the entry once, quietly. Then he read it again because he was certain he had misread it. He had not misread it. "The humans," he said. Yelm opened his eyes. The humans had never updated their receivers, not because they lacked the technology. They had the technology. They simply believed in redundancy. Their military doctrine, as the Compact Registry noted in a footnote that most species had never bothered to read, was built on the principle that no signal should ever go unanswered due to a failure of equipment. They kept every receiver active, every band, all the time. The distress signal Soon had sent, the one coded under Compact Article 9 as a species-level emergency call for all available military assistance, had just reached the largest joint military exercise the human fleet had conducted in 40 years. Yelm did not know that yet. He was still sitting quietly, thinking about the shape of the problem when the first response came in. It was not a message. It was a positioning ping, the kind a fleet uses to announce its approach vector. Then another. Then another. The console operator at the edge of the room turned around with an expression that Yelm would later remember as the face a person makes when numbers stop making sense. "Arbiter," the operator said, "I am reading 263 human vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the outer sensor boundary." The council chamber went completely silent. Not one ship, not a squadron, not a patrol group. 263 warships, appearing simultaneously across a sensor grid that was 30,000 kilometers wide, forming a line so precise it looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. The kind of ruler held by someone who had been building things exactly right for a very long time. Fleet Speaker Dara leaned over the console beside Yelm and looked at the numbers. She looked at them for a long time. "That is their entire 7th Expeditionary Fleet," she said, very quietly. "They were on exercises." "They came from exercises," Yelm said. "All of them," Dara said. Soon was standing near the back wall. He had not said anything since reading the registry entry. He was thinking about the word he had read in the Compact documentation, the word that appeared beside the human signature in Article 9. The word was unconditional. It meant that, when the humans signed the Mutual Defense Compact, they had done so with the promise that if they received a valid emergency call, they would respond with everything available. Everything available. He had accidentally sent the highest-grade emergency signal in the compact's legal library, and the humans had responded the way the compact always assumed someone would, with everything they had. A new signal came in then, clean and direct, no delay, no static. The universal translation layer processed it and put it on the main speakers in a calm, even voice. The kind of voice that had clearly made many decisions before and expected to make many more. This is Admiral Rowe of the United Earth Federation's 7th Expeditionary Fleet. We have received your Article 9 distress call and are responding under the terms of the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact. Please transmit full tactical situation data at your earliest convenience. We are in position and ready to assist. Ready to assist. Yelm looked at the sensor display. 263 ships, sitting in perfect formation, waiting. Dara turned to look at Soon. Soon looked at the floor. "What have we done?" Dara said. It was not a question. It was the kind of sentence people say when they already know the answer and simply need to hear it out loud to believe it. Yelm stood up from his chair. He straightened his coat. He breathed. "Get me a channel to their admiral," he said. And somewhere out there, past the sensor boundary, the human fleet waited with the patient, quiet stillness of something that had been built for exactly this. The first thing Admiral Rowe did, after opening the channel to the Velori Council, was listen. He did not speak. He did not introduce himself again. He simply left the channel open and waited while the translator handled the initial confusion on the other end, the overlapping voices, the hurried Velori that kept cutting itself off. He had learned early in his career that the fastest way to understand a room was to hear what it sounded like when nobody thought anyone important was paying attention. What he heard was panic dressed up in formal language. When High Arbiter Yelm finally spoke in a clear, composed sentence, Rowe responded. He confirmed the fleet's position. He confirmed the legal basis for their arrival. He asked for the tactical briefing in plain terms. What was attacking, from where, in what numbers, and with what method. His voice did not change in tone or speed from the first word to the last. When he finished, he said, "We are here to help. Please tell us what you are facing." Then he waited again. On the Velori flagship, Dara was watching the feed of the human fleet on a secondary screen while Yelm handled the channel. She had pulled up the positioning data and had been staring at it for 5 minutes now. The human ships were not drifting the way most fleets drifted during holding patterns. They were perfectly still, not anchored still, which would mean they had stopped moving entirely. They were correcting constantly, in tiny increments, every ship adjusting its position relative to every other ship so that the formation stayed exactly as it was. It was like watching 263 musicians play the same note together, in tune, without a conductor, because they had played together so many times they no longer needed one. "They are holding formation at rest," she said to the aide beside her. "Yes," the aide said. "That is their resting position," she said. "According to the data, yes." Dara did not say anything else for a moment. She thought about the Velori fleet's resting formation, which required active management from 3 separate command posts to maintain. She decided not to think about it further. Dr. Obi Enwasu arrived at the Coalition data terminal 90 minutes after the channel opened. He was carrying a portable analysis unit and a cup of something that smelled like processed beans. He was the kind of person who always seemed to be thinking about 3 things at once, and whose eyes moved faster than his mouth. He sat down, plugged in, and began going through the Coalition's tactical data on the Draconith swarm. The swarm data was 3 months old and 800 pages long. Enwasu finished reading the summary in 20 minutes and the detailed sections in another 40. Then he opened a new file and started building a model. Commander Sierra Holt came to check on him at the 2-hour mark and found him staring at the model with an expression she recognized as the one he made when something was both terrible and interesting at the same time. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Their colony losses follow a spiral pattern," Inwasu said. The swarm is not attacking randomly. It is herding the coalition fleet toward a specific region. If they keep responding the way they have been, they will walk directly into a containment pocket in approximately 9 days. Holt looked at the model. Does the coalition know this? No, Inwasu said. Their analysts have been treating each attack as a separate incident. They have not mapped the direction of the pattern. Holt nodded once. Put it in the briefing. It is already in the briefing, Inwasu said. The briefing took place 4 hours after first contact. Yelm, Dara, and 3 senior council members joined the channel while Ro's team presented. Inwasu explained the spiral pattern. He showed the model. He showed what happened to the coalition in 9 days if nothing changed, and what happened if the human fleet repositioned to block the next predicted attack vector. The difference between the 2 outcomes was not small. Yelm was quiet during the presentation. He asked one question at the end. How long did it take you to build this model from our data? Inwasu checked the time. About 3 hours, he said. Another long quiet followed that. It was Oren who made it strange, in the best possible way. Sub-Captain Oren was 22 years old by Velori reckoning, and had been assigned to escort a shuttle carrying the Coalition's physical data cores to the human flagship for transfer. He ended up in an airlock antechamber with Sergeant Deo for 11 minutes while a docking clamp was recalibrated. Deo was sitting on a crate, eating something out of a foil packet. Oren stood near the wall. Neither of them spoke for a while. Oren was trying to decide if the human was dangerous up close. He had been told that human soldiers were engineered for war, which he had understood as a metaphor, and then had seen Deo's hands, which made him think it was not entirely a metaphor. Deo looked up, caught Oren staring, and held the foil packet out. Protein bar, Deo said. Not great, but it does the job. Oren did not know what a protein bar was, but the gesture was clearly a friendly one. He took it. He looked at it. He ate a small piece of it. It tasted like compressed chalk mixed with something sweet that had given up trying. He ate the rest of it anyway, because Deo was watching with a small, honest smile, and because something about the gesture, its simplicity, its complete lack of politics, felt more real than anything that had happened in the council chamber all day. Thank you, Oren said. Sure, Deo said. The docking clamp finished recalibrating. They went their separate ways, but Oren thought about that protein bar for a long time afterward, and what it meant that a species capable of filling a sensor grid with warships also carried bad snacks and gave them away to strangers without being asked. Yelm read the human history file at night, alone in his quarters, with the lights turned low. He had requested it from the Galactic Species Registry as a matter of due diligence. He expected dry data, atmospheric composition of the human homeworld, average lifespan, technological development index, the kind of numbers that told you how advanced a species was and not much else. What he got instead was something the registry called a historical context supplement, filed by a coalition observation team 42 years ago and never formally reviewed. He read it for 3 hours. The human homeworld was wrong. That was the only word for it. It was too large, too heavy, too full of competing life forms that had never reached any kind of balance. Other worlds, the ones that produced space-faring civilizations, tended to settle into ecological stability over time, with dominant species rising and everything else adjusting around them. The human world had not done that. It had kept fighting with itself at every level from microbes to megafauna for billions of years. The humans had climbed out of that and into space while still, technically, being in competition with several thousand other species on their own planet. They had survived ice ages by inventing clothing and fire. They had survived plagues by learning what caused them and stopping them. They had survived their own wars, repeatedly, which the observation team noted was the most unusual part, because the wars were catastrophic by any measurable standard, and yet the species had not only continued, but had apparently used the recovery periods to advance faster than they had before. The report had a line near the end that Yelm read twice. It said, "This species appears to treat extinction-level pressure as a developmental condition rather than a terminal one." He set the file down and stared at the wall. There was a second file attached. This one was internal, coalition only. It was labeled Recommendation, Species Isolation Protocol, and it had been written by the same observation team, signed off by 4 senior compact advisors, and filed away without ever being formally voted on. Yelm pulled it open. The recommendation was simple. Humanity should be classified as a Class 3 primitive civilization and kept at arm's length. No direct contact beyond what was necessary. No military exchange programs. No detailed intelligence sharing. The reasoning cited was strategic uncertainty. A species with this developmental profile was unpredictable, and unpredictable species were risks. At the bottom of the file, there was a notation. It said the human government had been informally made aware that they were being classified as Class 3. The humans had responded by saying they understood, and that they wished to sign the Mutual Defense Compact anyway, and that the classification was the coalition's business and not theirs to argue with. They knew, they had known for 40 years. They had signed the compact, honored its terms, maintained their receivers, and said nothing. Yelm thought about this for a long time. He thought about Admiral Rowe's voice on the channel. Calm, clear, ready. He thought about Nwasu building a tactical model in 3 hours from data the coalition had been sitting on for 3 months. He thought about 263 ships holding perfect formation at the edge of sensor range, waiting patiently, asking for nothing except the information they needed to help. He was still thinking about this when Dara knocked and came in. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been sitting with a number she did not like and could not make wrong no matter how many times she checked it. She sat down across from him and put a data pad on the table. "I ran the projections," she said. "Without the human fleet, our best-case outcome against the full swarm is a managed retreat covering approximately 60% of outer colony space. We lose those worlds. The swarm consolidates, and we spend the next decade trying to push it back with diminishing resources." Yelm looked at the pad, and with them. "Different outcome," Dara said. "Different enough that I ran it 4 times. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We wrote them off. 40 years ago, the people who came before us looked at that species and decided it was safer to ignore them, and they kept their receivers on anyway." "Yes," Yelm said. "Why?" she asked. Yelm thought about the line in the report. Developmental condition rather than a terminal one. He thought about a species that climbed out of a world that tried to kill everything and learned to treat the trying as practice. "Because they knew someday we would need them," he said. "And they decided to be ready anyway, even for people who did not want them ready." Dara did not answer that. She picked up the data pad and left. Rowe, for his part, gathered the fleet at hour 36 and spoke plainly. He told them the coalition had made a mistake with the signal. He told them it did not matter. He told them there were alien worlds with people on them who were going to die if the swarm was not stopped, and that the compact gave the fleet both the right and the obligation to stop it. He told them to treat every coalition crew member with full respect. He told them to do their jobs well. Then he said one more thing, quietly enough that the recording almost missed it. "We were ignored for 40 years, he said. "We showed up anyway. Let's make sure they remember that." Deo, listening from the back of the briefing room, nodded once. He thought about Orin in the airlock. He thought about the look on the young alien's face when he had taken the protein bar, that careful, uncertain politeness of someone trying to understand something they had not been prepared for. He thought that is the whole story right there, the not being prepared for it, the trying anyway. He went to go check his kit. The swarm was coming, and it was almost time. The swarm arrived 3 days early. Nobody knew why. The Draconeth did not communicate in ways anyone had decoded yet. They did not send signals or advance warnings. They simply arrived, thousands of hive ships moving in one churning mass that the sensors read as a solid object before the resolution clarified and showed the individual units inside it. They came from the direction Nwasu's model had predicted, which meant the human fleet was already in position. It also meant the coalition fleet, which had been repositioning based on its old doctrine, was briefly facing the wrong way. In the 16 seconds it took for the coalition ships to begin adjusting, the human fleet had already moved. Orin was watching from the coalition command deck when it happened. He was there because Yeln had decided it was important for the junior officers to see this, whatever this turned out to be. He had a clear view of the main tactical display and a secondary screen showing a feed from an external camera on the hull of the flagship, pointed out toward open space. What he saw through the camera was this. The human ships moved together, not in sequence the way the coalition fleet moved, where the flagship gave an order and the order traveled down the chain and each ship responded in turn. The human fleet moved all at once, every ship pivoting and accelerating simultaneously, as if the decision to move had happened in all of them at exactly the same moment. In 6 seconds, the formation changed completely. In 12 seconds, the human ships had placed themselves between the coalition fleet and the leading edge of the swarm. 263 ships, between the coalition and 2,000 hive ships. The swarm hit the human line like water hitting stone. Orin had seen battle footage before. He knew what a ship looked like when it was taking heavy fire. Coalition ships, under that kind of pressure, followed a logic he understood. Take damage, reduce exposure, fall back to secondary position, protect critical systems. It was sensible. It was survivable. Human ships did not do that. A destroyer on the left edge of the formation took a direct hit from 3 Draconeth energy lances simultaneously. The hull damage read on the coalition sensors as critical. The ship should have pulled back. Instead it fired back, all 4 of its main guns cycling at a rate that the coalition's weapons analyst said, out loud and with genuine confusion in his voice, was 15% beyond the rated capacity of that class of weapon. They are overdriving the guns, the analyst said. Is that safe? Someone asked. No, the analyst said. The destroyer kept firing. On the Aurora, Commander Holt was not watching the destroyer. She was watching the swarm. She had been watching it since the engagement started, the same way she watched everything, with the particular kind of patient focus that came from having studied failure more than success. She was looking for the moment when the swarm's coordination slipped. Every 40 to 50 seconds, there was a fraction of a second where the attack wave changed pattern, where the hive mind shifted from one sequence to the next, and in that fraction there was a gap. Not a large gap. The sensors barely registered it, but it was there, regular as breathing, and she had seen it 3 times now. She built the targeting algorithm in 11 minutes. She handed it to the fleet's fire control officer and said, "When the gap opens, every available gun threads fire through that coordinate cluster. We are not trying to destroy individual ships. We are trying to break the coordination signal at the source." The fire control officer looked at the algorithm. He looked at her. This requires simultaneous fire across all ships within 0.2 seconds of each other. Yes, she said. That is not a standard protocol. No, she said, run it. The next time the gap opened, the human fleet fired as one. On the Velori command deck, Yeln saw what happened to the swarm when 300 concentrated weapon bursts hit the same cluster of hive ships within a quarter of a second of each other. The energy bloom was visible without instruments. The tactical display showed the swarm's formation do something it had not done in any of the recorded battle data from the past 6 months of conflict. It hesitated. The flowing, coordinated motion of the mass stuttered, the way a flock of birds stutters when something hits the middle of it. Then the swarm began to pull back. Not all at once, slowly, reluctantly, but backward. Dara stood very still beside Yeln and watched the sensor data. She watched the swarm retreat in real time, pulling away from the human line, reducing contact, falling back on vectors that the coalition had never seen from them before. In all the recorded history of conflict with the Draconeth, there was not a single documented case of the swarm retreating from a force it had the numbers to overwhelm. It had the numbers now. It was retreating anyway. "Why are they pulling back?" Yeln asked. Dara thought about it. She thought about the swarm, a hive intelligence built on predator logic, built to identify prey and pursue it. She thought about what it meant to be a predator faced with something that did not run, did not reduce exposure, did not protect itself the way prey protected itself. Something that instead moved forward under damage and fired harder. "I think," Dara said slowly, "they do not know what to do with something that does not behave like prey." Yeln looked at the display. The swarm was still retreating. On the hull camera feed, Orin could see Deo's unit through a viewport on one of the nearby ships. They were patching a hull breach with field equipment, working fast and steady, one of them laughing at something the others had said. Working as if the battle was already over, as if the outcome had never been in question. Orin watched them for a long time. He was beginning to understand. The silence after the swarm retreated lasted about 4 hours. Then the politics started. It began the way politics always began, with people who had not been in danger suddenly having strong opinions about what to do next. The Coalition Council convened in full session, which meant 12 species representatives, 47 advisors, and one advisor soon sitting in the back row trying to take up as little space as possible. The session was officially about tactical planning for the swarm's next expected advance. In practice, it was about the humans. Representative Kaller of the Marin delegation said it first, loudly enough that the translation layer struggled to soften it. He said that the situation needed to be resolved carefully. He said that having 263 armed human warships inside compact space was a significant security consideration. He said this while looking pointedly at the sensor display that still showed the human fleet holding its position at the edge of the combat zone, which had not moved since the engagement ended. Several other delegates nodded. Yeln let them nod. He let Kaller finish. He let the subsequent 7 minutes of concerned murmuring run their course. Then he said, very quietly, that he would like to remind the Council that under Article 9 of the Compact, they had legally and formally requested all available military assistance, that the humans had provided it, that the swarm had retreated for the first time in 6 months, and that the humans were still out there because the swarm had not been destroyed, only driven back. Kaller said the classification issue also needed to be addressed. The humans were still formally Class 3 in the registry. Compact law was unclear on the extent of obligations to a Class 3 partner. Yeln said he was aware of the classification. Kaller said perhaps the Council should defer any major decisions until the humans return to their own space, and a proper legal review could be conducted. Yeln looked at him for a moment. Then Yeln said, "The humans saved every outer colony world in this sector. They did it in one engagement, and you would like them to leave before we have said thank you properly." Kaller said it was not about thank you, it was about protocol. Yeln said protocol could wait. He requested a private channel with Admiral Rowe that evening. No aides on either side except Nwasu for translation, though by this point Rowe had picked up enough Velori formal phrasing that Nwasu spent most of the conversation watching quietly. It was a short meeting. Yeln had one question. He had been thinking about it since he read the isolation recommendation in the compact files. "Your government knew," Yeln said, "that we had classified your species as primitive, that we recommended keeping humanity at a distance. You knew this and you signed the compact anyway, and you have honored it for 40 years without complaint. I need to understand why." Rowe was quiet for a moment. He had the kind of face that was hard to read not because it was blank, but because it was steady, the same in all conditions, like a deck that does not tilt in rough water. The compact was the right idea, Rose said. Mutual defense. If one of us is threatened, all of us respond. That principle is correct whether you thought we were primitives or not. We were not going to walk away from a correct principle because the people who wrote it underestimated us. Yeln sat with that. And the other reason, he asked, because he had the sense there was one. Because someday you were going to need us, Rose said. And we wanted to be there when you did, not for credit, because the compact promised that we would be, and we do not break promises. Yeln thanked him and closed the channel. He sat in his quarters for a while. He thought about 40 years of the human fleet maintaining full receiver access, full compact readiness, in exchange for being quietly dismissed as a developing species by the very organization they were ready to die for. He thought about what kind of people did that, and why, and whether the Velori Compact had ever deserved it. He thought about the answer for a while. Then he opened a new file and started writing the reclassification paperwork himself. Dara did not sleep that night. She went through the battle data instead, specifically the damage reports on the human ships. She had a question she needed answered. She found the destroyer that had been triple hit in the opening minutes, the one she had watched keep firing past rated capacity. She pulled its full report. The crew had sealed 3 compartments, rerouted main power through a secondary conduit that was not designed for that load, and continued combat operations for 40 minutes before the battle ended. The ship's own automated safety system had flagged the power reroute as inadvisable 9 separate times. The crew had overridden it each time. The safety system had logged the overrides with a notation. The notation said, "Crew override accepted, reason given, mission critical." 9 times, mission critical. She closed the file and stared at her wall screen, which was still showing the external feed of the human fleet in its holding position. All 263 ships, still in perfect formation, waiting for whatever came next. She thought about species development protocols and threat assessment models, and the dry, careful language of the isolation recommendation. She thought about the weight of 40 years of being wrong about something this large. There was a message waiting from Oren when she checked her console. He had written a brief report on his interactions with Sergeant Deo, as all junior officers were required to file after cross-species contact. It was mostly formal. At the bottom, he had added a personal note which was not required. It said, "I believe we have been measuring the wrong things about them. I am not yet sure what the right things are, but I think I am beginning to learn." Dara marked the report as received and filed it under a category she made up on the spot. She labeled the folder, "What We Missed." She thought that was probably the right place for a lot of things. Yeln submitted the reclassification paperwork on a Tuesday, which was not a significant day on the Velori calendar, but which soon would later mark on his personal record as the day everything changed. The paperwork was not short. Reclassifying a species from Class 3 to Class 1 required documentation across 14 categories, including technological assessment, diplomatic history, military capacity, and something the Compact Registry called Cultural Stability Index, which Yeln had always privately thought was a polite way of asking whether a species was likely to cause problems. He filled out every section himself. He did not delegate it. When he got to the Cultural Stability Index, he wrote a single sentence where the form expected several paragraphs. The sentence said, "This species honored a compact that dishonored them for 40 years without complaint. I am not certain what else the index requires." He submitted it at midnight. By morning, 11 of the 12 council representatives had sent formal objections. Yeln read each one. He sent back the same reply to all 11, noted. Then he held a council session and said the following, standing, without notes, in a room full of people who did not want to hear it. He said the Velori Compact had spent 40 years treating humanity as a peripheral concern. He said that, while the Compact had been looking away, the humans had built a fleet capable of doing in one engagement what the Coalition had failed to do in 6 months. He said that was not an accident and not luck. He said it was the result of a species that had been preparing, quietly and without recognition, because preparation was simply what they did. He said there was a word for classifying something as primitive when it was not primitive. He said the word was wrong. He said the reclassification would stand. Kaller tried to speak. Yeln said the session was closed. The session was closed. Rowe received the formal notification of reclassification at 900 Fleet time. Commander Holt was on the bridge when the message came through. Rowe read it, nodded once, and asked her to announce it to the fleet. She put it on all channels. The response from 263 ships was a sound that started quiet and got very loud very quickly, the kind of sound people make when something they did not let themselves hope for turns out to be real. Rowe went to write his after-action report. He wrote it the way he wrote all his reports, in plain language, in order, without drama. 9 pages. When Holt read it later, she counted 6 points where a different person would have written something proud or triumphant, and Rowe had instead written the dry equivalent of it worked. She found this deeply funny. She told Nwasu, who agreed. They did not tell Rowe because he would not have understood why it was funny, which was most of the reason it was funny. Soon was called before the council 2 days after the reclassification. He walked in expecting a formal reprimand. He had spent a week preparing his defense, which was essentially that he had been awake for 31 hours and that the correct frequency for the scout ships was only 3 digits different from the emergency band, and that in his defense he would like to note that it had worked out. Yeln looked at him for a long time. Then Yeln said he was recommending soon for the compact service commendation. He said the error had been real, but the outcome of that error had revealed something the compact needed to know and had been avoiding knowing for 40 years. He said that sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was make the right mistake at the right time. Soon sat down before Yeln finished the sentence, which was not technically allowed in a council chamber, but which Yeln chose not to address. Oren wrote his letter to Deo the evening before the human fleet departed. He started it formally, the way the Velori opened all correspondence, with a statement of context and purpose. Then he kept writing and the formality fell away, and he found himself writing things he had not planned. He wrote about the protein bar. He wrote about watching Deo's unit patch the hull breach while laughing. He wrote about the moment he had understood, finally, what Deo had meant by someone has to go first. He wrote that he used to think that was a simple statement about bravery. He now understood it was a statement about choice. You could decide, before the danger arrived, that you would go first when it came. The humans had made that decision 40 years ago and had simply been waiting for the moment to prove it. He asked if they could write to each other. He asked this at the end, quickly, as if he was not sure of the answer. Deo wrote back the next morning before the fleet moved out. 2 sentences. The first said yes. The second said that if Oren ever wanted to visit, Deo could show him food that was actually worth eating, as opposed to protein bars, which Deo admitted were genuinely terrible. The fleet left at noon, 263 ships pulling out of Coalition space in the same perfect formation they had arrived in. Yeln watched them go from the observation deck, which was not something he usually did. He stood there until the last ship crossed the sensor boundary and the display went quiet. Dara came to stand beside him. She did not say anything for a while. "Do you think they will come back?" she asked. "Yes," Yeln said, "if we need them." "And if we do not need them?" Yeln thought about the compact. He thought about 40 years of maintained receivers, of a signal kept open for a call that everyone assumed would never come. He thought about what kind of species did that and why. "They will keep the channel open," he said. "That is what they do." Far out in deep space, past the sensor boundary, past the last marker buoy, the Draconeth swarm moved through the dark between stars. It was doing something it had never done before, something its ancient predator logic had no language for and no category to file it in. It was not retreating. Retreat implied a destination, a place of safety to return to. It was avoiding. For the first time in its entire existence, the swarm had encountered something it did not know how to classify. Not prey, not a competitor, something else. Something that moved forward under fire. Something that laughed while it worked. Something that offered food to strangers. The swarm had no word for what the humans were. It kept moving. It kept that sector of space in its memory, in the deep shared mind that held everything it had ever learned about the universe. And it did not go back.